A wealthy millionaire, living the high life abroad with his mistress, never expected the world he left behind to change. But when he returns home, he finds his ex-wife transformed, stronger, more independent, and thriving in ways he couldn't imagine. What will happen when their worlds collide once again? The Westwood Mansion was a towering estate of modern luxury, floor-to-ceiling windows, sprawling marble floors, and a chandelier hanging from the double-height foyer that caught every bit of sunlight. It was a palace built on the kind of wealth most could only dream of, but inside, it felt like a hollow shell. The hum of silence filled the hallways, punctuated only by the distant ticking of an antique clock. It was a silence Charlotte Westwood had grown used to over the years, though she often wished she hadn't. She stood in front of the full-length mirror in their master bedroom, smoothing down the soft fabric of her cream silk dress. Her reflection stared back at her, poised and elegant. But there was a dullness in her eyes that even the diamond necklace around her neck couldn't hide. She adjusted the clasp, fingers trembling just slightly, before stepping back to assess her appearance. She looked the part of a millionaire's wife, immaculate, graceful, untouchable. But inside, she felt far from it. Downstairs, she heard the familiar thud of the front door closing and Graham Westwood's brisk footsteps echoing across the marble floor. She paused for a moment, then exhaled, bracing herself. Their conversations had become a minefield, each word carefully chosen to avoid an explosion. Today, she had hoped things might be different. She made her way down the grand staircase, the soft click of her heels barely audible against the polished surface. When she reached the bottom, she saw Graham standing near the entrance, his phone pressed to his ear as he issued commands with the ease of a man used to controlling everything. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and his tailored suit fit him like a second skin, exuding the kind of power that had once captivated her. "Delay the meeting by 2 hours," he said into the phone, his voice steady and authoritative. "No, I don't care about their schedule. They'll wait." He ended the call with a swift tap and turned, his gaze landing on Charlotte. For a moment, she saw something flicker in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, but it vanished as quickly as it had appeared. "Busy morning?" she asked, her tone light but cautious. "Always," he replied, slipping his phone into his pocket. "I've got meetings lined up until late tonight." She nodded, her fingers playing with the hem of her dress. "I was hoping we could have breakfast together. It's been a while." Graham glanced at his watch, the gleaming gold catching the light. "I wish I could, but I don't have time. I'm meeting Vivian to discuss our itinerary for the trip." The name hit her like a slap, though she masked her reaction behind a serene expression. Vivian Hart, the woman who had effortlessly inserted herself into their lives, charming her way into Graham's inner circle. Most people assumed she was just another business associate, but Charlotte knew better. She had seen the way they looked at each other, the way Vivian laughed a little too freely at his jokes, the way he leaned in just a little too close during their conversations. "You're still going on that trip then?" she asked, her voice measured. He nodded, adjusting the cuff of his sleeve. "We leave tomorrow. A few weeks in Europe, then the Maldives. It's important for networking." Charlotte bit the inside of her cheek, holding back the words that threatened to spill out. She had begged him once, long ago, to prioritize their relationship over business, but she had learned that pleading only made her feel smaller. "That sounds lovely," she said instead, forcing a smile. "I hope it's everything you want it to be." There was a brief pause before Graham responded, as if he detected the undercurrent of her words but chose to ignore it. "It will be good for both of us. Some space." Space. The word hung between them like a final nail in the coffin. Charlotte lowered her gaze, hiding the storm brewing behind her eyes. He didn't even realize how much space had already grown between them. An entire ocean of unspoken resentment and unmet needs. "Well," she said, lifting her chin, "I'll stay here and keep myself busy." "I'm sure you will," he replied, offering a curt nod before turning toward the door. As the door clicked shut behind him, the silence returned, wrapping around Charlotte like a suffocating blanket. She stood there for a moment, staring at the empty space where he had been, before finally allowing herself to exhale. Later that evening, she sat in her home office, surrounded by books, journals, and half-finished sketches. The soft glow of the desk lamp cast a warm light over her workspace, but she felt anything but comforted. Her fingers traced the edges of a photograph lying on the desk, a picture of her and Graham from their early days. They had been young, hopeful, and full of dreams. She barely recognized the woman smiling back at her. The knock on the door startled her, and she quickly set the photo aside. When she opened the door, their housekeeper, Miriam, stood with a tray of tea. "I thought you could use this," Miriam said gently, placing the tray on the desk. "Thank you," Charlotte replied, offering a small smile. She waited for Miriam to leave before pouring herself a cup, the warmth seeping into her hands as she held it. Her mind drifted back to the conversation she had overheard weeks ago. Graham and Vivian laughing together in his study, their voices muffled but unmistakable. It had been the moment she realized she couldn't keep waiting for him to come back to her. He had already left. But tonight, something shifted inside her. She wasn't going to let this be the end of her story. Graham could go on his luxurious vacation, flaunting his success and his mistress, but she would no longer be the woman waiting by the window for his return. No, she had plans of her own. She reached for her notebook, flipping to a fresh page. The pen felt heavy in her hand, but as she began to write, the weight lifted. Ideas flowed about charity work, business ventures, and the kind of legacy she wanted to build without him. This wasn't about revenge. It was about rediscovering the woman she had been before she became Mrs. Westwood. Hours passed, and when she finally set the pen down, the first rays of dawn were beginning to creep through the curtains. She stretched, her muscles aching from sitting too long, but a sense of calm settled over her. For the first time in a long while, she felt in control. The next morning, as Graham packed his designer luggage, Charlotte watched from the doorway. He didn't notice her, too focused on choosing the right tie to match his suit. She wondered if he would ever notice her again, or if she had already become a ghost in his life. "I hope you have a wonderful trip," she said softly, making him pause. He turned, offering a polite smile but little else. "Thanks. I'll be in touch." As he wheeled his suitcase down the hallway, Charlotte stayed rooted in place, listening to the fading sound of his footsteps. When the front door closed behind him, she allowed herself one final moment of reflection before turning back toward her office. There was work to do, and she wasn't going to waste any more time waiting for someone who had forgotten how to see her. As Charlotte and Graham stood at the precipice of their new beginning, it's time for you to weigh in. What would you do if you were in their shoes? Do you believe in second chances, or would you have walked away? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more heartfelt stories. The private jet hummed quietly as it cut through the clouds, its sleek leather seats and crystal glassware a testament to excess. Graham Westwood reclined in his chair, one hand cradling a glass of scotch while the other lazily scrolled through emails on his tablet. The view outside the window was breathtaking. Blue skies and endless clouds stretched out like a canvas, but Graham hardly noticed. His mind was elsewhere, distracted by the weight of things he refused to confront. Across from him, Vivian Hart sat with perfect posture, her crimson dress hugging her figure and her manicured nails tapping gently against the armrest. She was the picture of luxury, effortlessly beautiful and confident. She glanced at Graham and smirked. "You're already working?" she teased, tilting her head. "I thought this trip was supposed to be about relaxation." He gave her a half smile, the kind that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Can't relax just yet. I've got a few deals to finalize." Vivian leaned forward, resting her elbow on the arm of her seat. Her perfume, a heady mix of jasmine and amber, wafted between them. "You need to learn to let go, darling. What's the point of having all this wealth if you can't enjoy it?" The plane jolted slightly as they hit a pocket of turbulence, and Graham tightened his grip on the glass. "I enjoy it just fine," he said, a bit too defensively. Vivian chuckled and leaned back, her gaze drifting out the window. "Then let's make sure this trip is memorable," she murmured, her voice dripping with suggestion. The jet touched down in Monaco, where luxury cars awaited to whisk them to the Hôtel de Paris, a palace of opulence nestled in the heart of the city. The hotel staff greeted them with practiced charm, whisking their luggage away as they were escorted to their suite. The suite itself was a work of art. Floor-to-ceiling windows with views of the Mediterranean, marble floors that gleamed under the chandelier's light, and a balcony that overlooked the city's glittering skyline. Vivian twirled in the middle of the room, her laughter echoing off the marble walls. "This is what I call paradise," she said, collapsing onto the plush couch and kicking off her designer heels. Graham stood by the window, watching as the waves crashed gently against the shore. The view was spectacular, but he felt a strange emptiness creeping in, the kind that no amount of luxury could fill. He had worked his entire life to achieve this level of success, but standing there, staring at the horizon, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. "Graham," Vivian called, her voice pulling him back to reality. "Stop brooding and come enjoy this." She patted the seat next to her, and after a brief hesitation, he joined her. She poured them both glasses of champagne and raised hers in a toast. "To new adventures," she said, clinking her glass against his. "To new adventures," he echoed, though the words felt hollow. The days that followed were a blur of decadence. Mornings were spent yachting along the coast, afternoons shopping in designer boutiques, and evenings attending exclusive galas where champagne flowed like water. Graham played the role perfectly, laughing at the right jokes, shaking hands with the right people, and posing for photographs that would make the headlines of society magazines. But beneath the surface, he felt like a man trapped in a golden cage. One evening, as they dined on a rooftop overlooking the sparkling city, Vivian leaned across the table, her eyes glimmering under the candlelight. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice soft but calculated. "Maybe it's time we made this arrangement more permanent." Graham set down his fork, suddenly aware of how quiet the world around them had become. Even the distant hum of traffic seemed to fade. "Permanent?" he repeated, though he knew exactly what she meant. She reached for his hand, her fingers cool against his skin. "You've given me everything I could ever want, but there's one thing I don't have yet." Her gaze locked onto his, and for the first time, he saw the ambition behind her charm. "I want to be more than your companion, Graham. I want to be your partner." The weight of her words pressed down on him like an anchor, and for a moment, he couldn't breathe. He had known this conversation was inevitable, but hearing the words out loud made it real in a way he wasn't ready for. His mind flashed to Charlotte, the woman he had once promised forever to, the woman he had left behind without a second thought. He hadn't given her a single call since boarding the jet, and the guilt gnawed at him now, sharp and unforgiving. "I need time to think," he said finally, pulling his hand away. Vivian's smile faltered for a split second, but she quickly recovered, masking her disappointment with a sip of champagne. "Of course, I understand." But the tension lingered between them, a silent reminder that they were on different paths. As they returned to the suite that night, Graham found himself standing on the balcony, staring out at the moonlit sea. The waves rolled in and out, their rhythm steady and unchanging, as if mocking the chaos inside him. Meanwhile, back at the Westwood mansion, Charlotte was anything but idle. She had spent the past few days finalizing plans for a new project, an ambitious initiative that would fund scholarships for underprivileged students. Her desk was cluttered with documents, proposals, and contact lists, but the chaos was a welcome distraction. She hadn't heard from Graham, but she didn't expect to. He was too busy basking in the glow of luxury with Vivian, and for once, she wasn't letting it bother her. Instead, she poured her energy into building something meaningful, something that would outlast the hollow promises of their marriage. Late one evening, as she reviewed a financial report, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and saw a message from her mentor, Eleanor Grant. "You're doing great things, Charlotte. Don't stop now." She smiled softly, the message a balm to her weary soul. Eleanor had been the one to remind her that she was more than just a wife, more than an accessory to someone else's success. With her guidance, Charlotte had begun to see herself as the architect of her own future. Back in Monaco, the cracks in Graham and Vivian's relationship widened. He had hoped that the trip would reignite his sense of purpose, but instead, it left him feeling more disconnected than ever. One morning, as they sat by the pool, Vivian scrolled through her phone, her expression sour. "You're barely present," she said, not bothering to look up. It's like your mind is somewhere else. He rubbed the back of his neck, the tension building. Maybe it is. The honesty caught her off guard, and for a moment, she stared at him as if seeing him for the first time. Is it her? She asked, her voice sharp. Are you thinking about Charlotte? He didn't answer, but the silence was confirmation enough. Vivian stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the stone floor. You're a fool, Graham, she spat. You have everything right here, and you're throwing it away. She stormed off, leaving him alone by the pool. He leaned back in his chair, the sun beating down on him, but all he felt was cold. As the trip neared its end, Graham realized that no amount of luxury could mask the emptiness he carried. The life he had built, the choices he had made, they all felt like a hollow pursuit of something he couldn't even define. And for the first time, he wondered if Charlotte had been right all along. Maybe it wasn't about the wealth, the mistress, or the status. Maybe it was about finding something real. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late. The mid-afternoon sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Charlotte Westwood's home office, casting warm golden rays across the room. The scent of freshly brewed coffee wafted from the cup resting on her desk, but she hadn't touched it yet. Her fingers hovered over her laptop keyboard, tapping lightly as she skimmed through the latest proposal for the scholarship program she was spearheading. This project, this mission, had become more than just a distraction from her crumbling marriage. It was a symbol of her rebirth. A gentle knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. Miriam, their housekeeper, peeked her head in with a knowing smile. There's someone here to see you, Mrs. Westwood. Charlotte looked up, confused. I wasn't expecting anyone. It's Eleanor Grant, Miriam said, stepping aside to let the older woman in. Eleanor entered with her usual air of elegance, a woman in her 60s who exuded wisdom and grace. She wore a tailored navy suit, her silver hair swept neatly into a chignon. She had been a guiding force in Charlotte's life ever since their chance meeting at a charity gala years ago. I didn't think I'd see you until the board meeting next week, Charlotte said, rising to give her a warm hug. I had some free time and thought I'd drop by to check on you, Eleanor replied, settling into the chair across from her. Besides, I know how absorbed you get when you're working on something big. Charlotte smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. It's been consuming in a good way. Eleanor studied her for a moment, as though peeling back the layers of her carefully composed exterior. And how are you? Really? The question lingered in the air, heavy and unavoidable. Charlotte traced the rim of her coffee cup before answering. I'm managing. Some days are harder than others. Managing isn't the same as thriving, dear. I know, Charlotte admitted, sighing, but I'm getting there. This project, it's given me purpose. I feel like I'm building something meaningful, something that's mine. Eleanor nodded approvingly. That's exactly why I'm here. I've been talking with a few key donors, and they're interested in expanding the program. If you're up for it, you could oversee the expansion personally. The offer hung between them, tempting and terrifying all at once. Expanding the program meant stepping further into the spotlight, something Charlotte had always avoided while married to Graham. But now, the idea of standing on her own, of being recognized for her own achievements, ignited a spark inside her. I'd love to, she said softly, her voice gaining strength as the words settled. I'm ready. They spent the next hour discussing the logistics, mapping out potential partnerships, and strategizing how to present the initiative to the board. By the time Eleanor left, Charlotte felt a renewed sense of purpose. She had spent years supporting Graham's ambitions, but now she was creating her own legacy. As the evening settled over the city, the warm glow of the setting sun painted the sky in hues of amber and pink. Charlotte stepped out onto the terrace, the cool breeze brushing against her skin. She wrapped her arms around herself, not from the cold, but from the weight of the memories this place held. She could still picture the nights she and Graham had spent out here, sipping wine and talking about their future, back when their dreams had been intertwined. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her from her thoughts. She glanced at the screen and saw a message from an unfamiliar number. This is only the beginning. Don't let anyone hold you back. Eleanor, a small smile tugged at her lips as she locked her phone and leaned against the railing. For the first time in a long while, the future didn't seem so daunting. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Graham Westwood sat at the bar of a luxury hotel in Rome, nursing his second glass of bourbon. The room was filled with the hum of conversation, laughter, and the clinking of glasses, but it all blurred together into white noise. Vivian Hart sat beside him, scrolling through her phone with a bored expression. "You're quiet tonight," she said, not looking up. "I'm thinking," he replied, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. She sighed dramatically and set her phone down. "You've been doing a lot of that lately. What's on your mind?" He hesitated before answering. "Nothing specific." Vivian raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into a knowing smirk. "Is it her?" He didn't need to ask who she meant. The answer was obvious, but admitting it felt like defeat. "I'm just reflecting." "Don't fool yourself, Graham," she said, leaning in closer. "Charlotte's probably moved on by now. She's not waiting for you." The words stung more than he expected. He had left thinking that Charlotte would always be there, a steady presence in his life even if he wasn't physically around. But the longer he stayed away, the more he realized how much he had taken her for granted. "I know," he admitted quietly. Vivian laughed softly, though there was an edge to it. "You're a fool. You know that? You've got everything right here. Wealth, freedom, me, and you're still hung up on her." He drained the last of his bourbon and set the glass down with more force than necessary. "It's not that simple." She rolled her eyes and stood, grabbing her purse. "Whatever you say. I'm heading back to the room." As she walked away, Graham felt the weight of his decisions press down on him. The luxury, the affairs, the endless chase for more. It had all been a distraction, and now, the emptiness it left behind was suffocating. Later that night, as he lay in the king-sized bed of their suite, staring at the ornate ceiling, he couldn't sleep. His mind kept drifting back to Charlotte, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her passions, the way she had supported him even when he didn't deserve it. He wondered what she was doing at that very moment and whether she ever thought about him. Little did he know, Charlotte was wide awake too, sitting at her desk and mapping out the next phase of her project. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, fueled by determination and the memory of every moment she had been dismissed or overlooked. This was her time to reclaim what had been taken from her. She paused for a moment, glancing at the photograph on her desk. It was an old picture of her and Graham from their first anniversary, back when their smiles had been genuine. With a sigh, she turned the photo face down and returned to her work. The road ahead was long, but she was ready for it. She wasn't just rebuilding her life. She was transforming it. By dawn, Graham sat on the hotel balcony, watching as the city woke up beneath him. He sipped his coffee, the bitterness a stark contrast to the warmth of the morning sun. The air smelled of fresh bread and blooming flowers, but the beauty of the moment was lost on him. His phone sat next to him, the screen lit with notifications he had no desire to check. When Vivian finally emerged from the suite, still groggy and wrapped in a silk robe, she glanced at him with a mix of irritation and indifference. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep," he replied, not meeting her gaze. She sat across from him, lighting a cigarette. "You're really in a mood lately." He didn't respond, and the silence stretched between them. For the first time, he realized that the thrill he had once felt with Vivian had faded. She wasn't what he needed, and maybe she never had been. As the sun continued to rise, Graham made a decision. He didn't know exactly what his next move would be, but he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't keep running. Not from Charlotte, and not from himself. It was time to go home. The car's tires crunched against the gravel driveway as the sleek black sedan pulled up to the entrance of the Westwood mansion. Graham Westwood sat in the back seat, tapping his fingers against the leather armrest while staring out the tinted window. The place looked exactly as he had left it months ago. Grand, stately, and immaculate. But as the car came to a stop, an odd sensation settled over him, a gnawing discomfort in the pit of his stomach. Something felt different, even if he couldn't yet put his finger on it. The driver opened the door, and Graham stepped out, adjusting his suit jacket as the autumn breeze rustled through the surrounding trees. He took a moment to inhale the crisp air, hoping it would steady him. Instead, it heightened his nerves. The front door opened before he could reach it, and Miriam, their longtime housekeeper, greeted him with a warm but reserved smile. "Welcome home, Mr. Westwood," she said politely. "Thanks, Miriam," he replied, glancing past her into the foyer. It was quiet, save for the faint sound of piano music drifting from one of the rooms. "Where's Charlotte?" "She's in the sunroom," Miriam said, stepping aside to let him in. "I'll let her know you've returned." He nodded, but as he entered the familiar space, something felt off. The walls were still adorned with the same tasteful artwork, and the grand staircase still swept up toward the second floor, but there was an energy in the air that hadn't been there before. It was subtle, but undeniable, like the house had taken on a new pulse in his absence. Setting down his luggage by the staircase, Graham made his way toward the sunroom, following the sound of the piano. As he walked, he noticed little changes. Fresh floral arrangements placed strategically throughout the hallways, a new sculpture in the corner that hadn't been there before. Small details, but they added up, making it clear that someone had been curating the space with care and intention. When he reached the sunroom, he stopped in the doorway, his breath catching slightly. Charlotte sat at the grand piano, her fingers gliding effortlessly across the keys as she played a soft, melancholic tune. She wore a simple but elegant dress, her hair falling in soft waves over her shoulders. There was a serenity about her, as if she had found peace in his absence, a peace that stung more than he expected. She must have sensed him standing there, because her hands slowly came to a stop, and she turned to face him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Her gaze was steady, and unlike the last time they had been in the same room, she didn't seem hesitant or unsure of herself. "You're back," she said, her voice calm and measured. "I am," he replied, stepping further into the room. "I didn't want to surprise you." She smiled faintly, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's fine. I've had plenty of time to adjust to surprises." The weight of her words hung between them, but Graham didn't know how to respond. Instead, he glanced around the room, noting the changes here too. New books lining the shelves, a vase of fresh lilies on the side table. It was as if every corner of the house now reflected her presence, her influence. "You've been busy," he said, gesturing to the room. "I have," she replied, folding her hands in her lap. "I decided to make a few changes while you were gone." He nodded slowly, still absorbing the shift in atmosphere. "It suits you." An awkward silence settled between them before Charlotte stood and walked over to the window, gazing out at the sprawling garden. "How was your trip?" "Long," he admitted, joining her by the window. "It wasn't what I expected." "Things rarely are," she said softly, as if speaking from experience. Her gaze remained fixed on the garden, but he could tell her mind was elsewhere. "Did you find what you were looking for?" He hesitated. No, the simplicity of his answer seemed to catch her off guard, and she finally turned to look at him. "Then why did you go?" It was a question he had asked himself more times than he cared to admit. "I thought I needed to get away, to figure things out," he said, his voice laced with regret. "But the further I got, the more lost I felt." Her expression softened slightly, but she remained guarded. "And now you're back." "Yes," he said, stepping closer. "I'm back because I realized that what I was looking for wasn't out there. It was here with you." Her breath hitched, but she quickly recovered, taking a step back. "Graham, you can't just expect things to go back to the way they were." "I know," he said, his voice earnest. "I don't expect that. I know I messed up, and I'm not asking for forgiveness overnight. But I need you to know that I see things differently now." She studied him for a moment, as if searching for sincerity in his words. "You left, Graham. You left when I needed you most." "I know," he whispered, guilt weighing heavily on him. "And I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you if you let me." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she quickly blinked them away. "I'm not the same woman you left behind." "I know," he said, and for the first time, he truly understood what that meant. The woman standing before him wasn't the timid, uncertain version of Charlotte he had taken for granted. She had grown, evolved, and reclaimed her power. "And I'm not the same man." A moment of silence passed, filled only by the sound of the wind rustling the trees outside. Finally, Charlotte turned and walked back toward the piano, running her fingers along its polished surface. "I've built a life for myself while you were gone," she said quietly. "I'm not sure there's room for you in it anymore." The words cut deep, but Graham didn't flinch. "Then let me earn that room," he said. "Let me prove that I can be the man you deserve." She exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing just a fraction. "I don't know if that's possible." "It is," he insisted. "I'm not asking you to trust me today or tomorrow. I'm asking you to give me a chance to show you that I've changed." She sat down on the piano bench, her fingers resting gently on the keys. "It's not just about you changing, Graham. It's about whether I want to let you back in." He swallowed hard, the vulnerability of the moment nearly overwhelming. "Then tell me what you need and I'll do it." For the first time since he had returned, Charlotte allowed herself to be vulnerable. A tear slipped down her cheek, and she quickly wiped it away. "I need time." He nodded, understanding that this was the best he could hope for. "I can give you that." The clock in the hallway chimed softly, marking the passage of time as they sat in silence, both lost in thought. Finally, Charlotte stood and walked toward the door. Before leaving, she turned to face him one last time. "Don't make promises you can't keep, Graham." As she disappeared down the hallway, Graham remained in the sunroom, staring out the window at the garden that seemed more alive than ever. He knew that the road to redemption wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, he felt ready to take the journey. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he was determined to fight for it, one step at a time. The morning sunlight filtered softly through the lace curtains of the Westwood mansion, casting delicate patterns onto the polished wood floors. Graham Westwood sat in the breakfast room, the quiet hum of the coffee machine filling the air as he drummed his fingers against the marble tabletop. A week had passed since his return, but the distance between him and Charlotte still loomed like a shadow over their home. She was polite, civil, even, but there was a guardedness in her interactions that made it clear she hadn't fully let him back in. Every conversation felt like treading water, and Graham was growing tired of drowning in the silence. As he sipped his coffee, he couldn't help but wonder if she was waiting for him to give up, to pack his bags and leave again. But he wasn't that man anymore, and he intended to prove it. The sound of approaching footsteps pulled him from his thoughts, and Miriam appeared in the doorway, carrying a stack of mail. "Morning Post," she said, placing the pile on the table before excusing herself. Graham absent-mindedly flipped through the envelopes, bills, invitations, advertisements, until one letter caught his attention. It was addressed to Charlotte in elegant handwriting, with a return address that he recognized from their earlier years together. A law firm in Boston. His curiosity was piqued, but he respected her privacy enough to set it aside without opening it. Just as he was about to return to his coffee, Charlotte entered the room, her presence as composed and graceful as ever. She wore a simple cream blouse tucked into tailored trousers, her hair pulled back into a loose bun. Even in casual attire, she carried herself with the air of someone who knew her worth. "Good morning," she said, pausing briefly by the counter to pour herself a cup of tea. "Morning," Graham replied, watching as she moved toward the table and noticed the letter. Her eyes flickered with recognition, and for a moment, she hesitated before picking it up. "Something important?" he asked, attempting to sound casual. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she ran her thumb along the edge of the envelope, as if debating whether to open it in front of him. Finally, she sat down and carefully peeled it open. Her eyes scanned the contents, her expression remaining unreadable, but he noticed the way her fingers tightened around the paper. "Everything okay?" he pressed, leaning forward slightly. She folded the letter neatly and set it aside, her gaze meeting his. "Yes, just some paperwork regarding an inheritance." He raised an eyebrow. "Inheritance?" She nodded, taking a sip of her tea. "My great-aunt Elizabeth passed away a few months ago. I didn't expect to receive anything, but it seems she left me a substantial portion of her estate." The words "substantial portion" echoed in Graham's mind, but he kept his face neutral. "That's unexpected." "It is," Charlotte agreed, her tone calm but measured. "She was always private about her finances, so I had no idea." He leaned back in his chair, trying to piece together what this meant. "How substantial are we talking?" She hesitated, as if weighing whether or not to tell him. "Enough to change things," she said simply. The ambiguity frustrated him, but he didn't push further. Instead, he nodded and reached for his coffee, masking the unease bubbling inside him. Charlotte excused herself shortly after, leaving him alone to wrestle with the implications of her sudden windfall. By midday, Graham found himself in his home office, unable to focus on the stack of documents awaiting his review. The news of Charlotte's inheritance lingered like a persistent itch at the back of his mind. He had always been the provider, the one with the financial power in their relationship, but now, the balance had shifted, and he wasn't sure how to navigate it. Determined to get some answers, he made a call to an old friend who worked in financial consulting. Within an hour, he had more information than he had anticipated. Charlotte wasn't just inheriting a small fortune. She was now one of the wealthiest women in their social circle, with assets ranging from real estate to investments in major corporations. He sank into his leather chair, running a hand through his hair. The revelation was both humbling and unsettling. Charlotte had always been supportive of his success, but he had never considered what it would be like if their roles were reversed. Now, she held the kind of power he had once wielded so effortlessly, and it terrified him. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching his office. He looked up to see Vivian Hart standing in the doorway, her arms crossed and an amused expression on her face. "You don't look happy to see me," she teased, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Graham sighed and leaned back in his chair. "What are you doing here, Vivian?" "I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd check in," she said, casually seating herself on the edge of his desk. "But judging by the look on your face, I'd say something's got you rattled." He didn't respond, but the silence was enough for her to press further. "Let me guess," she said, twirling a strand of hair around her finger. "It has something to do with Charlotte, doesn't it?" "Vivian, I'm not in the mood for games," she smirked, clearly enjoying his discomfort. "You know, I warned you about this. You thought she'd be sitting here waiting for you to come back, but she's outgrown you, Graham. And now she's got the money to prove it." Her words hit harder than he expected, and he stood abruptly, pacing to the window. The view of the garden offered little comfort as he tried to compose himself. "I'm not going to lose her," he said firmly. Vivian laughed, a bitter sound that echoed off the walls. "She doesn't need you anymore. That's the difference." He turned to face her, his jaw clenched. "Maybe she doesn't need me, but that doesn't mean I'm giving up." She rolled her eyes and slid off the desk. "You always were stubborn. But be careful, Graham. She's not the woman you remember. You might not like what you find." Without another word, she sauntered out of the office, leaving him alone with his thoughts. He sank back into his chair, her parting words replaying in his mind. He knew she was right in some ways. Charlotte had changed, and he couldn't rely on their shared history to win her back. He needed to prove that he was worthy of the life she was building. That evening, Charlotte attended a charity gala downtown, an event she had once dreaded but now embraced with confidence. As she mingled with influential figures and shared her vision for the scholarship program, she felt a sense of belonging she hadn't experienced in years. She wasn't just Mrs. Westwood anymore. She was a force to be reckoned with. When the event concluded, she stepped outside to find her driver waiting. But before she could reach the car, she heard a familiar voice calling her name. She turned to see Graham approaching, his tie slightly loosened and a look of determination in his eyes. "Can we talk?" he asked, slightly out of breath. "Graham, what are you doing here?" she asked, surprised. "I needed to see you," he said, stepping closer. "I know about the inheritance." Her expression hardened slightly. And I want you to know that this doesn't change how I feel," he said earnestly. "I'm not here because of the money. I'm here because I still believe in us." She studied him for a moment, her gaze searching for any hint of insincerity. "This changes everything, Graham. You need to understand that." "I do," he said, his voice steady. "But I also know that money isn't what defines us. It's what we do with it that matters." Her lips parted, as if to respond, but she hesitated. The weight of his words settled over her, and for the first time, she saw a glimpse of the man he used to be, the man she had fallen in love with. "I don't know if I can trust you yet," she admitted. Then let me earn it, he said softly. The city lights flickered in the distance as they stood there, the air thick with unspoken promises and possibilities. Neither of them knew what the future held, but one thing was clear. This was only the beginning. The ballroom at the Grand Crest Hotel buzzed with the sounds of polite conversation, the clinking of champagne flutes, and the soft hum of a string quartet playing in the background. Chandeliers glittered overhead, casting a golden glow over the crowd of elite socialites, business moguls, and philanthropists who had gathered for one of the year's most prestigious charity galas. The air smelled of expensive perfume and ambition, but tonight, one woman stood at the center of it all, Charlotte Westwood. She moved through the room with effortless grace, her emerald green evening gown hugging her figure perfectly, the fabric shimmering under the lights. Her hair was styled in soft waves that framed her face, and her smile, polite but enigmatic, drew people toward her like moths to a flame. She was no longer just the woman standing in Graham Westwood's shadow. Tonight, she was the star. Charlotte, an older man in a tailored tuxedo, called, extending his hand. Harold Lorne, one of the city's most influential real estate developers, greeted her warmly. You've certainly made an impression tonight. Everyone's been talking about your new initiative. She accepted his handshake, her confidence unwavering. Thank you, Harold. I'm just grateful for the support we've received. This scholarship program means a lot to me. And it shows, he said, offering a genuine smile. The way you've turned this project into something monumental. It's inspiring. Charlotte gave a modest nod, though inside, a flicker of pride warmed her chest. This was what she had worked for. Recognition, not as someone's wife, but as a woman who had carved her own path. She excused herself after a few minutes and made her way toward the bar, needing a brief reprieve from the constant flow of conversations. As she reached for her glass of champagne, she caught sight of Graham across the room. He was speaking with a small group of investors, his posture as composed and confident as ever, but there was a shadow in his gaze that hadn't been there before. His tailored black suit fit him perfectly, but the man wearing it seemed different, less sure of himself, more contemplative. He glanced up and their eyes met. For a moment, the noise around them faded, and time seemed to slow. It wasn't the first time they had seen each other at an event since his return, but tonight, something about the weight of his stare unsettled her. Breaking eye contact, she turned back to the bar and took a sip of her drink. She wasn't ready for whatever conversation he was hoping to have. Across the room, Graham watched her carefully. The way she carried herself now was mesmerizing, and he couldn't help but feel a pang of regret. He had spent years thinking of Charlotte as the woman who needed him, the woman who stayed behind to support his ambitions while neglecting her own. But the woman in front of him tonight wasn't waiting for anyone. She was thriving, and the realization was both humbling and painful. Graham, a familiar voice called, pulling him out of his thoughts. Vivian Hart stood beside him, her red dress as striking as her presence. You're awfully quiet tonight. I'm just taking it all in, he said, keeping his gaze fixed on Charlotte as she moved to speak with another group of guests. Vivian followed his line of sight and sighed dramatically. You still think you can win her back, don't you? I know I can, he said firmly, but even he could hear the uncertainty in his voice. Vivian laughed softly, shaking her head. You don't get it, do you? Look at her, Graham. She's outgrown you. The words stung, but he refused to let her see how much they affected him. Maybe she's changed, he admitted, but that doesn't mean it's over. It should be, she said, leaning in closer. You have me. Why keep chasing something that's already gone? He stepped back, creating distance between them. Because she's worth it. For a brief moment, something vulnerable flashed across Vivian's face, but she quickly masked it with a smirk. Suit yourself, she said, walking away and disappearing into the crowd. As the night progressed, Charlotte found herself standing by the balcony doors, enjoying the cool breeze that filtered in from outside. The sound of the gala continued behind her, but out here, she could finally breathe. She closed her eyes for a moment, savoring the peace, but it didn't last long. Charlotte, Graham's voice called softly from behind her. She opened her eyes and turned to face him. He stood a few feet away, his expression a mixture of hesitation and determination. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the distant sounds of the gala filling the silence. "You're doing well," he finally said, his voice gentle. "Thank you," she replied, keeping her tone polite but distant. "I meant it," he added, stepping closer. "Seeing you like this, it's incredible." She studied him carefully, searching for any hint of ulterior motive. "Why are you here, Graham?" "Really?" he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Because I wanted to see you. And because I needed to tell you that I'm proud of you." The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard, and for a moment, she didn't know how to respond. "You don't need to do this," she said softly. "You don't need to say things to make me feel better." "I'm not," he said firmly. "I'm saying it because it's true. I know I hurt you. I know I left you when you needed me, and I know I can't undo that. But I also know that you're stronger than you've ever been, and I admire that." Her breath hitched, but she quickly regained her composure. "You don't get to come back and say these things like it fixes everything." "I'm not trying to fix it," he admitted. "I'm just trying to be honest." She turned away, gripping the railing tightly as the breeze brushed against her skin. "Do you know what the hardest part of this has been?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He stepped closer, his gaze fixed on her. "What?" "Letting go of the version of you I used to love," she said, tears threatening to spill. "The man who made me believe we were building something together. But that man left, Graham, and I had to rebuild myself without him." "I know," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I hate that I made you feel that way. But I'm still here, and I want to be part of your life again. On your terms." She closed her eyes, her heart warring with her mind. The man standing before her wasn't the same man who had walked out months ago. He was different, humbled, vulnerable, and desperate to make amends. But was it enough? Before she could answer, a voice called her name from inside the ballroom. She turned to see one of the event organizers waving her over, and she exhaled, grateful for the interruption. "I have to go," she said, stepping away from the balcony. "Charlotte," Graham started, but she shook her head. "Not tonight," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. "I can't do this tonight." He nodded, understanding that the conversation wasn't over, but for now, it was on pause. As she disappeared back into the crowd, Graham remained on the balcony, the cool night air wrapping around him like a reminder of the distance still between them. He wasn't sure how long he stood there, but one thing was certain. He wasn't giving up. The shift in power was real, and Charlotte held all the cards. But if he wanted to win her back, he knew it would take more than promises. It would take action, and he was ready for it. The heavy clouds outside hung low over the city, casting a gray, somber hue over the Westwood estate. Rain tapped lightly against the glass windows, creating a rhythmic, almost hypnotic sound that contrasted sharply with the storm brewing inside. Charlotte Westwood stood in the kitchen, her hands gripping the edge of the marble countertop as she stared into her cup of tea. The steam rose lazily, but she made no move to take a sip. She had been awake since dawn, unable to shake the weight pressing on her chest. Last night's encounter with Graham at the gala replayed in her mind like a broken record. His words, so raw, so honest, had stirred something deep within her, something she had buried beneath layers of resentment and independence. But she wasn't ready to confront those feelings. Not yet. Footsteps echoed in the hallway, growing louder until Graham appeared in the doorway. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, and his tie hung loosely around his neck, giving him a disheveled look that seemed out of place in the pristine, organized kitchen. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the rain and the faint ticking of the clock mounted on the wall. "Morning," he said softly, breaking the silence. "Morning," she replied, her voice barely audible. He moved toward the coffee machine, pouring himself a cup before leaning against the counter across from her. His gaze lingered on her, as if searching for an opening, but Charlotte kept her eyes focused on the swirling tea in her cup. "I couldn't sleep last night," he admitted, setting his coffee down. "I kept thinking about what you said." Her fingers tightened around the porcelain cup. "Graham, I don't want to have this conversation right now." "We need to," he said gently but firmly. "You've been avoiding me since I came back, and I get it. I deserve that. But we can't keep dancing around this." She finally looked up, meeting his gaze. His green eyes, once so full of arrogance and self-assurance, now held a vulnerability she wasn't used to seeing. It disarmed her, but she quickly put up her defenses again. "What do you want me to say?" "The truth," he said, stepping closer. "Tell me how you really feel." Her breath hitched, and she turned away, walking toward the window. The rain had intensified, droplets sliding down the glass like tears. "You left, Graham," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You left me here to pick up the pieces, and now you're back, expecting me to just forget?" "I'm not asking you to forget," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I'm asking you to give me a chance to make things right." She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "You don't get it, do you? I spent years supporting you, believing in your dreams, thinking that one day you'd make room for mine. But you didn't. You left when things got hard, and I had to rebuild myself without you." He closed the distance between them, standing just a few feet away. "I know I failed you," he said, his voice thick with regret, "and I'll carry that guilt for the rest of my life. But Charlotte, you've changed. You've become this incredible, powerful woman, and I admire you more than I ever have. I want to be part of your life again. Not because I need you, but because I respect you." Tears welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Respect wasn't enough before. Why should it be now? "Because I'm different," he said, stepping even closer. "I know that doesn't erase what I did, but I'm willing to prove to you that I can be the man you need." She turned to face him fully, her chest rising and falling with the weight of her emotions. "How do I know this isn't just another promise you'll break?" "I can't give you guarantees," he admitted, "but I can give you my word, and I'll spend the rest of my life making sure I don't break it again." The vulnerability in his voice cracked something inside her, and before she could stop herself, the tears she had been holding back spilled over. He reached out, gently brushing a tear from her cheek with his thumb. The warmth of his touch sent a shiver down her spine, and for a brief moment, she allowed herself to lean into it. "I don't know if I can trust you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Then let me earn it," he replied, his hand still resting against her cheek. "We don't have to rush this. We can take it one step at a time." She pulled away, wrapping her arms around herself as she tried to steady her breathing. "I need time." "I understand," he said, stepping back to give her space. "But please don't shut me out." The sound of the doorbell echoed through the house, breaking the tension. Charlotte wiped her tears quickly and composed herself. "I should get that," she said, walking toward the front door. When she opened it, a courier stood on the porch, holding a package. She signed for it and thanked him before closing the door. As she carried the package into the living room, Graham followed her, curiosity etched across his face. "What is it?" he asked. She placed the package on the coffee table and carefully opened it, revealing a stack of legal documents. Her eyes scanned the top page, and she stiffened slightly. "It's from my attorney," she said, her voice neutral. "About the inheritance?" he asked. "Yes," she replied, flipping through the pages. "It's the final transfer of assets." His throat tightened as he watched her. "You've really built something incredible, haven't you?" She looked up, her expression unreadable. "Yes, I have." Silence settled between them, heavy with unspoken words. Graham wanted to tell her how proud he was, how much he regretted not seeing her potential sooner, but the words felt inadequate. Instead, he sat down on the couch, running a hand through his hair. "I used to think success was about power," he admitted, "about being the one in control. But now, seeing you like this, I realize how wrong I was. Success isn't about control. It's about creating something meaningful, something that lasts." She studied him for a moment, her gaze softening just slightly. "It took me a long time to understand that too. I want to be part of that world," he said, meeting her gaze. "But only if you'll have me." Her lips parted, but no words came out. She wasn't ready to make a decision, and he could see that. But he also saw something else, hope. It was faint, like the first ray of sunlight breaking through storm clouds. But it was there. "You've hurt me, Graham," she said softly. "More than you know. "I know," he whispered, "and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for it." She stood, hugging herself tightly as she stared out the window at the rain. The storm was beginning to let up, the sky brightening ever so slightly. "I don't know if we'll ever be what we used to be. Maybe we're not supposed to be," he said, standing as well. "Maybe we're supposed to be something new, something stronger." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she closed her eyes, letting his words sink in. When she finally turned back to face him, her expression was a mixture of uncertainty and cautious optimism. "I need time," she repeated, but this time, her voice carried a hint of possibility. He nodded, understanding that this was the most she could offer for now. "I'll wait." As the rain outside slowed to a drizzle, they stood in the quiet living room, two people caught between the pain of the past and the hope of what could be. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, neither of them was running from it. The late afternoon sun filtered through the large windows of Graham Westwood's downtown office, casting long, golden shadows across the oak conference table. The room smelled faintly of leather and freshly brewed coffee, but the usual hum of energy and power that once defined this space had long faded. Graham sat at the head of the table, the collar of his shirt slightly unbuttoned and his sleeves rolled up to his elbows. Stacks of financial reports lay in front of him, each one more damning than the last. The numbers didn't lie. His business was in trouble. He leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair as he tried to make sense of how it had all unraveled so quickly. Just months ago, he had been riding high, closing deals and expanding his portfolio. But somewhere along the way, the cracks had started to form. First, it was a failed investment in a luxury development that had drained a significant portion of his capital. Then, key partners began to pull out, citing instability and rumors of internal conflict. Now, with investors losing confidence and the board demanding answers, Graham felt the weight of the world pressing down on his shoulders. "Sir," Margaret, his assistant, appeared in the doorway, her expression hesitant. "The board meeting is scheduled for 4 p.m. They're expecting a detailed recovery plan." He nodded, though he had no idea what he was going to say. "Thanks, Margaret." As she left, the silence of the room closed in around him. He had always been the man with a plan, the one who thrived under pressure, but this time felt different. This time, he wasn't sure if he could fix it. His phone buzzed on the table, and he glanced at the screen. It was a message from Vivian Hart. "I heard about the business. Want to meet?" He stared at the message for a moment before deleting it. Vivian had distanced herself from him the moment things started to go south, and he had no interest in revisiting that chapter of his life. She had been a distraction, a reminder of the man he no longer wanted to be. What he needed now wasn't someone to soothe his ego. It was a solution. But the solution seemed just out of reach, slipping through his fingers no matter how hard he tried to hold on. Meanwhile, across town, Charlotte Westwood sat in the conference room of a non-profit organization she had partnered with for her scholarship program. The room was bright and welcoming, filled with charts, diagrams, and photographs of students who had already benefited from the initiative. She listened intently as the program director outlined their latest progress, jotting down notes and offering feedback where needed. "Thanks to your support, we've been able to expand into 2 additional schools this year," the director said, beaming. "The response from the community has been incredible." Charlotte smiled, a genuine warmth spreading through her chest. "That's wonderful to hear. Let's keep building on this momentum." As the meeting wrapped up, her phone vibrated in her bag. She pulled it out and saw a message from Miriam. "Graham's business is all over the news. Thought you'd want to know." Her fingers hovered over the screen for a moment before she tapped on the link Miriam had included. It led to an article detailing Graham's recent financial troubles, complete with speculation about whether he could recover. The headline was brutal. "Westwood Enterprises on the brink. Can the former Titan rebuild?" Her chest tightened as she read through the article, her mind flashing back to the man she had once known. The man who had been so confident, so driven, and so determined to conquer the world. But this wasn't the same Graham anymore. The man she had seen at the gala and on their recent encounters was different. Humbled, yes, but also desperate. She closed the article and sat back in her chair, torn between concern and self-preservation. She had spent months building a life independent of him, and the last thing she wanted was to get pulled back into his chaos. But another part of her, the part that had once loved him deeply, couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in her gut. Was he truly beyond saving? Or did he still have the strength to pull himself out of this mess? Later that evening, Graham sat in his apartment, nursing a glass of whiskey as the city lights twinkled outside his window. The weight of the day pressed heavily on him, and the alcohol did little to numb the ache in his chest. He had spent the past few hours poring over strategies, reaching out to contacts, and trying to piece together a plan, but nothing seemed solid enough to present to the board tomorrow. His thoughts drifted to Charlotte, as they often did during moments of weakness. He wondered what she was doing, whether she had heard about his situation, and if she even cared. He had been so sure that he could win her back, but now, with everything falling apart, he wasn't sure if he even deserved her. The knock at the door startled him. He set his glass down and walked over, half expecting it to be Margaret with more bad news. But when he opened the door, he was met with the last person he expected to see. Charlotte. His voice was thick with surprise. She stood in the hallway, a mixture of hesitation and determination etched across her face. She wore a navy trench coat, her hair slightly damp from the evening mist. "Can I come in?" He stepped aside, closing the door behind her as she entered the apartment. The air between them was heavy, charged with unspoken emotions. For a moment, they just stood there, staring at each other, before Charlotte broke the silence. "I heard about the business," she said softly. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "I figured you would." "I wasn't sure if I should come," she admitted, removing her coat and draping it over the back of a chair. "But I couldn't stop thinking about you." Her words sent a wave of warmth through him, but he quickly pushed it aside. "I'm not sure what you're hoping to find here, Charlotte. I'm not exactly in a good place right now." "I know," she said, stepping closer. "That's why I'm here." He sank onto the couch, leaning forward with his elbows resting on his knees. "I don't know how to fix this," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Everything's falling apart, and I don't know where to start." Charlotte hesitated for a moment before sitting beside him. "Then start by being honest with yourself." "I've made so many mistakes," he said, shaking his head. "With the business, with you." "I'm not here to rehash the past," she interrupted gently. "I'm here because I believe you can still fix this. But you need to stop trying to do it all alone." He turned to face her, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. "I don't know if I can." "You can," she said firmly. "But you have to let go of the idea that asking for help is a sign of weakness. It's not. It's how you grow." Her words hung in the air, and for the first time in a long while, Graham felt the weight on his chest begin to lift. He had spent so long trying to be the man who could do it all, who didn't need anyone. But now, he realized how lonely that path had been. "What do I do?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly. "You take it one step at a time," she said, placing her hand on his. "And you start by believing that you deserve a second chance." His gaze dropped to their hands, her touch grounding him in a way that nothing else had. He didn't know if he could fix everything overnight, but with Charlotte by his side, even if just as a guiding presence, he knew he could at least try. "Thank you," he whispered, the sincerity in his voice cutting through the silence. As they sat there, the city lights flickering in the distance, Graham realized that redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about learning from it and building something better. And with Charlotte's faith in him, he finally believed that he could. The steady hum of traffic echoed faintly from the street below as Charlotte Westwood stood by the large windows of her home office, watching the morning sunlight spill across the garden. The soft glow illuminated the vibrant flowers she had planted months ago, a project she had taken on during a moment of clarity when she decided that regaining control of her life meant nurturing something of her own. Today, the garden flourished, a stark contrast to the tangled mess of emotions brewing inside her. Her phone buzzed on the desk behind her, interrupting her thoughts. She didn't need to check it to know who it was. Graham had been texting her regularly over the past week, but she had yet to respond to most of his messages. She wasn't ignoring him out of spite, but because she wasn't sure what to say. Every interaction between them now felt like a delicate balancing act, one misstep away from toppling everything they had started to rebuild. Letting out a slow breath, she turned away from the window and sat down, scrolling through the unread messages. The latest one caught her attention. "I'll be at the cafe on 5th Avenue at noon. I don't expect anything, but I'd like to see you." Her fingers hovered over the screen, her heart pounding. She closed her eyes and thought of all the times he had let her down. All the nights she had cried herself to sleep while he was halfway across the world chasing deals and dreams that had never included her. But then, she thought of the man he was now, the man who had stood on her doorstep, vulnerable and willing to change. He wasn't perfect, and he probably never would be, but he was trying. That much, she couldn't deny. She tapped out a response before she could second-guess herself. "I'll be there." The cafe was a quaint, rustic space nestled between two tall brick buildings, its interior filled with the scent of freshly baked pastries and roasted coffee. The soft chatter of patrons created a cozy atmosphere, but as Charlotte stepped inside, her nerves refused to settle. She spotted Graham immediately. He was sitting at a corner table near the window, a cup of coffee in front of him and a notebook open to a blank page. He looked up as she approached, his expression shifting from uncertainty to relief. "You came," he said, standing to greet her. "I did," she replied, offering a small smile as she took the seat across from him. "How long have you been waiting?" "Not long," he said, sitting back down and closing the notebook. "I wasn't sure if you'd come." "I wasn't sure either," she admitted, folding her hands in her lap. An awkward silence settled between them, filled only by the sound of the barista calling out drink orders. Charlotte traced the rim of her cup with her fingertip, searching for the right words. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she finally said, breaking the silence. "About us, about everything that's happened." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. And I'm still not sure where I stand," she said honestly. "I've spent so much time trying to protect myself from getting hurt again that I don't know how to let my guard down." His gaze softened, and he nodded slowly. "I understand, and I don't want to rush you. But I want you to know that I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." "I appreciate that," she said quietly. "But I need to be sure that this time will be different." "It will be," he said, his voice steady. "I know I can't erase the past, but I can promise you that I'm not the same man who left. I've learned that success means nothing without someone to share it with." Her heart clenched at his words, but she forced herself to stay grounded. "You say that now, but what happens when things get hard again? What happens when the next big deal comes along?" "I won't make the same mistakes," he replied without hesitation. "I know you don't have any reason to believe me yet, but I'm willing to spend the rest of my life proving it to you." She studied him, searching his face for any sign of doubt or deception, but all she saw was sincerity. His vulnerability disarmed her in a way she hadn't expected, and for the first time, she allowed herself to consider the possibility that maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild what had been broken. But it wasn't just about him. It was about her too, her growth, her independence, and the life she had created without him. Could she reconcile the woman she had become with the possibility of sharing her life with Graham again? "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. He reached across the table and gently took her hand in his. "So am I. But I think that's a good thing." "Why?" "Because it means we care enough to be afraid," he said. "And if we care that much, then maybe it's worth the risk." Her eyes welled with tears, but she quickly blinked them away. "You make it sound so simple." "It's not," he said with a small chuckle. "But nothing worth having ever is." They sat in silence for a moment, the warmth of his hand grounding her as she tried to make sense of the whirlwind of emotions inside her. Finally, she exhaled and pulled her hand away, needing a moment to think clearly. "I need one more thing from you," she said, meeting his gaze. "Anything," he replied. "I need you to be okay with the fact that I'm not the same woman you left behind," she said firmly. "I've built something for myself, and I'm proud of it. I won't give that up for anyone, not even you." A smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. "I wouldn't want you to. That's what I love about you, Charlotte. You're stronger now, And that strength is what makes us different this time. Her breath caught in her throat at his words, and she looked away, overwhelmed by the intensity of the moment. But when she turned back, she saw the man who had fought his way through his own struggles, who had faced failure and come out the other side with a new perspective. He wasn't perfect, but neither was she. Maybe that was the point. "Okay," she whispered, barely trusting her voice. "I'm willing to try." Relief washed over his face, and for the first time in a long while, he smiled. A genuine, heartfelt smile that made her chest ache. "Thank you," he said softly. "But this doesn't mean everything is fixed," she added quickly. "We have a lot of work to do." "I know," he said, "and I'm ready for it." They finished their coffee, the conversation gradually shifting to lighter topics as the tension between them eased. By the time they left the cafe, the air between them felt lighter, filled with a sense of cautious optimism. As they walked down the street together, the city bustling around them, Charlotte realized that this wasn't the end of their journey. It was just the beginning of something new. There would be challenges ahead, moments of doubt and difficulty, but for the first time in years, she felt like they had a chance. And that, she thought, was worth everything. The soft glow of twilight bathed the garden in shades of amber and violet as Charlotte Westwood stood on the stone pathway, her eyes tracing the outlines of the blooming flowers she had planted months ago. The scent of lavender and jasmine drifted through the air, carried by a gentle evening breeze. It was peaceful here, a haven she had created during her loneliest moments, and now, it seemed fitting that this was where she found herself tonight. Her hands rested lightly on the wooden railing of the garden's pergola, where she had spent many sleepless nights thinking about the life she had once shared with Graham. There was a time when she had come here to cry, to scream silently into the night, and to ask herself why she wasn't enough for him. But tonight, there were no tears, only the quiet hum of possibility. She heard the crunch of footsteps behind her and turned to see Graham approaching. He had shed his usual suit and tie for a more relaxed look, dark jeans, a gray sweater, and the faintest shadow of stubble on his jaw. He looked different, and it wasn't just the clothes. There was a calmness about him, a grounded presence that hadn't been there before. As he reached her, he smiled, a small, tentative gesture, as if he wasn't sure how welcome he was in this sacred space. "You found me," she said softly, turning back to the garden. "You weren't exactly hiding," he replied, leaning against the railing beside her. They stood in silence for a moment, the evening sounds of crickets and rustling leaves filling the gaps between them. Graham glanced at the flowers, his brow furrowing slightly. "I remember when you first started working on this garden," he said. "I didn't understand why you were so dedicated to it." Charlotte smiled faintly. "That's because back then, you didn't understand what it felt like to need something of your own." He nodded, accepting her words without defense. "I do now." She glanced at him, surprised by his admission, but she didn't say anything. Instead, she let the silence settle between them again, waiting to see what he would do next. "I know tonight is important," he said, breaking the quiet. "It's a turning point for us, isn't it?" She exhaled slowly, her fingers tightening around the railing. "It could be," she admitted, "or it could be the end." The weight of her words hung in the air, and Graham shifted slightly, turning to face her fully. "I don't want it to be the end, Charlotte. I'm standing here because I believe we can build something new, something better." She looked down at her hands, her thoughts swirling like the autumn breeze that brushed past them. "It's not that simple," she said. "I've worked so hard to get to where I am, to be independent, to build a life where I don't rely on anyone. And I don't want to take that away from you," he said quickly. "I want to be part of that life, not overshadow it." She sighed, finally meeting his gaze. "That's what I'm afraid of. What if we fall back into old patterns? What if I lose myself again?" "You won't," he said firmly, "because I won't let you. And more importantly, you won't let yourself." The conviction in his voice caught her off guard, and for a moment, she allowed herself to consider the possibility that he was right. She had grown stronger, more self-assured, and she wasn't the same woman who had once clung to the hope that he would prioritize her over his career. She had learned to prioritize herself. "What if it's not enough?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. He stepped closer, closing the distance between them. "It's enough," he said softly, "because this time, we're both different. We've both learned what we need, and we've both fought to become better versions of ourselves." She searched his eyes, looking for any sign of doubt, but all she saw was sincerity. Her heart ached with the weight of her decision, but beneath the fear was something else: hope. The kind of hope she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. "Do you remember the last time we stood in this garden together?" she asked suddenly, her voice trembling slightly. He nodded. "You were planting the lavender. I didn't stay long." "No, you didn't," she said, a bittersweet smile tugging at her lips. "I stayed out here for hours after you left, wondering if you'd ever come back. I wish I had come back sooner," he admitted, his voice thick with regret. "But I'm here now, and I'm not leaving." Tears welled in her eyes, and she quickly wiped them away, laughing softly at herself. "I hate that you can still make me cry." He smiled gently. "It's not my intention, I promise." She took a deep breath, grounding herself in the present moment. The past would always be there, a part of their story, but it didn't have to define their future. "I'm scared," she admitted again, her vulnerability on full display. "I know," he said, taking her hand in his. "But we can be scared together." For the first time that evening, she let herself believe that maybe they could. Maybe the love they had once shared wasn't gone. It had just been waiting for them to find it again, buried beneath the rubble of their mistakes. "What happens if this doesn't work?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then we try again," he said without hesitation. "And if we fall, we get back up. Together." Her heart swelled at his words, and for the first time in years, the walls she had built around herself began to crack. She had spent so long protecting herself from pain that she had forgotten how to let love back in. But Graham's persistence, his willingness to confront his flaws and fight for their future, was slowly breaking down her defenses. "I want this to work," she said, her voice stronger now. "I really do." "Then let's make it work," he said, squeezing her hand gently. "One step at a time." She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek, but this time, she didn't wipe it away. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was one of release, of letting go of the pain that had kept her tethered to the past. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the garden in shadows, Charlotte leaned into Graham's embrace. His arms wrapped around her, steady and warm, and for the first time in a long while, she felt safe. Not because she needed him to protect her, but because she knew she could protect herself, and he was willing to stand beside her, not in front of her. "We have a lot of work to do," she murmured against his chest. "I know," he replied, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "But we'll get there." The garden around them swayed gently in the evening breeze, as if nature itself was breathing a sigh of relief. This wasn't the ending of their story, but the beginning of a new chapter. One built on honesty, resilience, and the belief that love, when nurtured properly, could bloom again. And as they stood together under the twilight sky, Charlotte realized that the future, for all its uncertainties, didn't seem so daunting after all.